So, you're just walking down a city sidewalk, right?
Mm.
Maybe you are hurrying to a meeting or just trying to grab a coffee.
Right, just a normal Tuesday.
Yes, exactly. Normal day. And you see someone slumped in a recessed doorway of a closed business.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're nodding off or they're standing on the corner and they're just talking animatedly to someone who, simply isn't there.
It's an incredibly visceral image, yeah. And we've all seen it.
We have.
Yeah.
And your brain, when you process this really uncomfortable moment, it immediately draws a straight line.
Of course it does.
You just think, okay, this person's severe mental illness or their blinding addiction, that is what caused them to lose their home.
It's the most intuitive leap to make.
Right. They got sick, and so they ended up on the street. It feels completely logical.
Totally logical.
But for our deep dive today, we are opening up this massive dossier of data. I mean, we've got stuff from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, SAMHSA.
Right, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
Exactly. Plus researchers at Johns Hopkins and these top sociologists. And all of it proves that this intuitive straight line is, well, it's often drawn completely backward.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. So our mission today is to look at the hard evidence showing that the street doesn't just collect sick people.
Right.
It actually actively creates them.
Yeah, and that completely upends the usual public policy debate. I mean, it turns it on its head.
It really does.
But to even begin untangling this, we have to establish one non-negotiable rule for how we interpret all the data we're about to go through.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have to completely separate the question of who ends up on the street from the question of how many people a city ultimately puts there.
Wait, say that again. Who versus how many?
Exactly. The data is incredibly clear that illness matters enormously when you are looking at the individual, the who.
Right.
But when you zoom out and look at the total number of people living outside in a given region, mental illness and addiction practically vanish as statistical drivers.
I'm fascinated by that contradiction.
It's a huge paradox.
Yeah, how can the thing that seems to define the crisis on a personal level just fail to explain it on a systemic level?
Very well, that's the big question.
And that is the core mission of our deep dive today. Let's unpack it.
Let's do it.
But I should note, for anyone listening right now, we are going to navigate some incredibly heavy terrain today.
Yeah, we really are.
We are digging into the mechanics of severe mental illness, trauma, substance use, and overdose mortality.
It gets dark.
It does. Our goal is to be relentlessly analytical and break apart entrenched stereotypes, but we really want to do that without ever losing sight of the very real human suffering at the center of this.
Absolutely.
So if you or someone you know is struggling, help is available. In the U.S., you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Right.
Or you can dial SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-EALP.
And grounding the conversation in that reality is just so essential because the numbers we're dealing with represent profound human distress.
Yeah, real people.
Exactly. So let's look at how we measure that distress. The most frequently cited metric in the media is the point-in-time count.
The PIT count.
Yeah, the PIT count, which is conducted by the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Right, HUD. And I've been reviewing the 2023 PIT figures that you brought in for this deep dive.
What stood out to you?
Well, HUD reports that roughly 21% of people experiencing homelessness report having a serious mental illness.
Okay, 21%.
And about 17% report chronic substance abuse.
Right.
I look at those numbers, 21% and 17%, and honestly, it just doesn't match the reality of what I see on a daily basis.
It feels incredibly low, doesn't it?
It feels way too low. I mean, if I had to formulate a guess based on the methodology, I'd assume it's because this count is usually done in the dead of winter, right?
Exactly. Late January, usually.
But you're asking volunteers to approach someone who is actively freezing in a tent. And they are likely terrified of being arrested or having their belongings thrown away.
Completely on edge.
Right. And you're asking them to disclose highly stigmatized psychiatric history to a total stranger holding a clipboard.
Yeah. Hey, tell me about your schizophrenia.
Exactly. Is that environmental barrier where the data is just totally failing us?
Oh, that environmental barrier is the entire friction point of the methodology.
Makes sense.
The point-in-time count relies overwhelmingly on self-reporting in a moment of acute crisis. And, trust requires safety.
Right.
And an unsheltered person is By definition, profoundly unsafe.
Right, they're in survival mode.
Exactly. If someone approached you in your absolute most vulnerable, exhausted moment and asked for a detailed accounting of your trauma and drug use, self-preservation dictates that you would minimize it.
Or just flat out deny it.
Right, you deny it. Consequently, researchers and sociologists almost universally view that 21% and 17% as a massive baseline undercount.
Okay, so if the clipboard approach out on the street fails to capture the reality, what happens when we look at data collected under, different circumstances?
Like what?
Say when someone actually gets inside and sits down with a doctor in a clinic.
Well, the statistical picture shifts dramatically.
I bet.
When we look at clinical assessments, which are evaluations conducted by medical professionals over time, typically when individuals enter permanent supportive housing or get intensive case management,
Okay.
the actual prevalence of these conditions reveals itself.
So what are the real numbers?
Well, serious mental illness, which we define clinically as a diagnosable disorder causing severe functional impairment.
Like what specifically?
Things like schizophrenia, bipolar 1, or major depressive disorder with psychotic features.
Got it.
That actually runs anywhere from a fifth to a full third of the population.
A third. Wow. Okay. And what about for substance use disorder?
The clinical assessments place substance use disorder anywhere from a sixth to well over a third.
That is a huge jump from 17%.
It is. And when you combine those figures, accounting for individuals who carry a dual diagnosis,
Meaning they have both.
right, meaning they live with both a serious mental illness and an active addiction, you're looking at a third to a half of the total homeless population.
A third to a half.
Yeah,
That is just staggering.
it's massive.
I mean, in 2024, the national count hit a record of over 771,000 people experiencing homelessness on a single night.
Yeah, highest ever recorded.
So half of that population means hundreds of thousands of people navigating severe biological and psychological vulnerabilities without a roof.
It is a profound public health failure.
But even that broad average kind of hides the most important distinction, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, because the word homeless is a catch-all term. It lumps together wildly different realities under one umbrella.
Oh, absolutely. It is the single most common analytical trap in this entire debate.
Right.
We treat homelessness as a monolith, but the behavioral health numbers are not spread evenly across those 771,000 people.
So how do we break it down?
We have to cleave that population into two distinct demographic groups. You have the transient majority, and you have the chronically homeless.
Okay, tell me about the transient majority first.
The transient majority represents the largest share of the unhoused.
Go.
This is the family who was priced out of their two-bedroom apartment and is now doubling up on a relative's floor.
Oh, right.
Or it's the warehouse worker sleeping in their sedan in a big box store parking lot while they try to save for a new security deposit.
So demographically, they are experiencing an acute economic crisis, but they mirror the broader housed low-income population.
Exactly.
They aren't necessarily battling psychosis or severe fentanyl addiction at rates drastically higher than anyone else living below the poverty line.
Precisely. They are poor and they are priced out, but they aren't inherently sicker than the housed poor.
That makes total sense.
But then you have the second group, the chronically homeless population.
And HUD has a specific definition for this, right?
They do. HUD defines this group very specifically as individuals who have been homeless repeatedly or for an extended continuous period and who also have a disabling condition.
Okay, so this is the visible group.
Yes, this is the visible, unsheltered minority sleeping on sidewalks, in subway cars, and in those large encampments.
And this is exactly where the public perception originates.
100%.
When you or I, or the average voter or commuter, forms an opinion on homelessness, they aren't visualizing the invisible family sleeping in a minivan.
No, you don't even see them.
Right. You are visualizing the chronically unsheltered person experiencing a highly visible behavioral health crisis right in front of you.
And among that specific chronic subgroup, the clinical numbers just absolutely skyrocket.
Hit me with the data.
According to the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, roughly 30% of the chronically homeless live with a serious mental illness.
30%.
Yeah, and even more staggering, 75%, literally 3 out of every 4 people in this chronic category. They report having a serious mental illness, a substance use disorder, or both.
3 out of 4.
Yeah. And if you look at surveys from permanent supportive housing programs that are built specifically for this population, about 73% of residents have these conditions.
That's so dense.
The illness is hyper-concentrated in the exact group that the public interacts with daily.
Okay, let me pause here and play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone listening to these statistics.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hearing that 75% of the chronically homeless, the actual people I step around on the sidewalk, have a severe psychiatric disorder or a crippling addiction,
Yeah,
my intuition screams that the illness is the catalyst.
of course.
It makes perfect chronological sense. You think, okay, the person developed schizophrenia in their early 20s, they couldn't maintain employment, their family just couldn't manage the erratic behavior, so the rent didn't get paid, and boom, they ended up on the street.
The domino effect.
Right. The addiction or the illness came first, and the homelessness was just the tragic consequence.
That intuition is incredibly powerful, and honestly, we have to validate it because for a certain segment of the population, it is the exact tragic trajectory of their life.
Right, it does happen.
It absolutely happens. Untreated psychosis and active severe addiction will completely obliterate a person's ability to maintain a lease, hold a job, and keep their social support networks intact.
It just tears through everything.
Yeah, illness can absolutely be the direct cause of someone losing their housing.
But I feel a but coming. The implication is that for the vast majority, it isn't.
It isn't. The peer-reviewed evidence reveals a deeply uncomfortable plot twist here.
Okay, let's unpack this uncomfortable plot twist.
When sociologists and medical researchers actually study the timeline of these individuals' lives, they find what is known as a bidirectional pathway.
Bidirectional, meaning it goes both ways.
Exactly. Yes, illness is a massive risk factor for falling into homelessness. But for a staggering share of people living on the pavement, the severe mental decline and the crushing addiction are a direct physiological product of being unsheltered.
Okay, this is wild. We're talking about the street as an actual sickness machine.
A trauma factory.
I was reading through the 2025 systematic review by Adams and colleagues that you sent over, the one published in Trauma, Violence, and Abuse.
Yes, phenomenal review.
And what stopped me in my tracks was how methodically they traced the biological and psychological decay caused simply by living outside.
It's brutal.
It is. So if we take someone from that transient majority we talked about earlier, say a worker who lost their apartment strictly because of a rent hike.
Purely economic.
Right, purely economic. And they run out of couches to surf on and they end up in a tent. They have no prior history of severe psychiatric illness. They have no addiction.
A completely healthy baseline.
Yeah. What is the actual mechanism that breaks their mind down once they are out there?
The most immediate and destructive mechanism is the total collapse of the biological foundation of sanity, which is sleep.
Just basic sleep.
Yeah. Chronic sleep deprivation is the defining torture of unsheltered survival.
Wow.
When you are sleeping outside, you are never achieving deep, restorative REM sleep.
Because it's not safe.
Your environment is completely hostile. You are sleeping with one eye open, hypervigilant to the sound of footsteps, because the threat matrix is astronomical out there.
It's basically a war zone for them.
It is. Unsheltered individuals are robbed, beaten, and sexually assaulted at rates that housed people simply cannot fathom.
I mean, the biology of that is terrifying. If you deprive any healthy human being of REM sleep for just a few consecutive days, cortisol floods the brain.
Oh, yeah. Massive cortisol spikes.
And the amygdala becomes hyperreactive, and they will begin to exhibit symptoms that are indistinguishable from clinical paranoia, severe anxiety, and extreme emotional volatility.
And that's just after a few days.
Right. Now compound that biochemical stress over weeks, months, or even years.
It literally breaks the brain.
The constant auditory processing of highway noise, the hypervigilance every single time a zipper opens on a tent near you.
And the physical environment compounds the neurological damage.
How so?
Well, you are enduring the chronic physical pain of sleeping on concrete. You are subjected to dangerous extremes of heat and cold.
Right. Weather exposure.
You exist in a perpetual state of survival mode, which literally rewires your nervous system over time.
It changes your actual neurochemistry.
Exactly. This chronic, compounding environmental trauma triggers new psychological disorders. That individual who entered the street purely because their rent was too high can, within just a few months, develop clinical depression, severe anxiety disorders, or suicidal ideation that just did not exist when they had a front door with a deadbolt.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
And that biological breakdown perfectly explains the other half of this equation, doesn't
Right.
it? The addiction.
Absolutely.
There's this brilliant nonprofit media project called Invisible People, run by Mark Horvath.
I'm very familiar, yeah. They do great work.
They really do. They basically just turn the camera on unsheltered individuals and let them tell their own stories without any filter.
Right.
And there is a recurring chorus in those interviews. People who are currently physically dependent on opioids or methamphetamine, they will explicitly state, "I didn't start using until I lost my home."
You hear it constantly.
Or they'll say, "I drank socially before, but I didn't become an alcoholic until I had to sleep outside in December."
This is where we really have to look at the pharmacology of street survival.
The pharmacology of survival. I like that phrasing.
The medical community recognizes this escalation as self-medication.
Right.
In the context of chronic homelessness, drugs and alcohol cease to be recreational. Nobody is partying out there. They're utilized as crude, desperate survival tools.
I want to make sure we really explore the utility of that self-medication, because it's almost like examining an occupational hazard.
Okay, give me an analogy.
Well, it's like if you take a deep-sea diver and send them down 300 feet without a pressurized suit.
They'd be crushed.
Right? The ocean's going to crush their lungs and snap their bones. And then we pull them up to the surface, point at their broken bones, and say, well, clearly they were always defective. That's why they failed.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
Right. No, the environment destroyed them. So how are these specific drugs functioning as the suit for people on the street?
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. Let's look at the specific utility of different substances.
Okay, let's start with alcohol.
If you are in agonizing joint pain from sleeping on frozen ground, and you have no access to healthcare or even basic ibuprofen, alcohol functions as a highly accessible anesthetic.
It just numbs the pain.
Right. And if the winter temperatures drop below freezing and you don't have a shelter bed, alcohol or fentanyl can provide a dangerous, temporary illusion of warmth and emotional numbness to the trauma of your daily existence.
It's like turning down the volume on the suffering.
Exactly.
And what about methamphetamine? Because that is the drug we most associate with the erratic, highly visible behavior on the street corners, right?
Right, the psychosis. Methamphetamine serves a very specific utilitarian purpose out there. Vigilance.
Vigilance, so keeping watch.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you are terrified of being assaulted in the dark, or if you need to guard your only remaining possessions from being stolen, methamphetamine allows you to stay awake and alert for 3, sometimes 4 days straight.
Wow, just overriding the biological need for sleep entirely.
Exactly. The drug solves the immediate existential problem of vulnerability, but the cost is drug-induced psychosis.
Which is exactly what the public sees when they observe someone talking to themselves on the corner.
Yes. They aren't necessarily inherently schizophrenic. They might be 3 days deep into meth-induced sleep deprivation because they are terrified to close their eyes.
That is just heartbreaking. So they are essentially medicating the symptoms of the environment.
Exactly.
The honest, scientifically rigorous formulation is that illness and addiction are both risk factors for homelessness and direct products of it.
It's a feedback loop.
Right, and untangling which came first for any specific individual you see on the sidewalk is almost impossible just by looking at them.
You'd need their entire medical history.
But this brings up a glaring, massive contradiction in all this data.
Let's hear it.
If the street is the engine causing the illness and driving the self-medication, why is the crisis so geographically uneven?
The geography.
Yeah. A sidewalk in Charleston, West Virginia is just as hard as a sidewalk in Los Angeles. If trauma and addiction are the mechanisms, why do we see exponentially more people on the streets in certain parts of the country?
That's a great question. And to solve that geographic puzzle, we look at the groundbreaking 2022 research by Greg Colburn and Clayton Page Alder.
In their book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, right?
Yes. They set out to test the public narrative against the actual regional data, and what they found fundamentally rewrites our understanding of the entire crisis.
Okay, because if mental illness and addiction were the primary engines driving the total number of homeless people in a city, the map of the United States would look completely different, wouldn't it?
It would look like an exact overlay of addiction rates.
Right. And Colburn and Aldern highlight this really stark contrast. California versus West Virginia.
The perfect comparison.
Per capita, homelessness is roughly 5 times higher in California than it is in West Virginia.
5 times.
So if the prevailing theory holds that addiction and mental illness cause homelessness, then California must have 5 times the rate of addiction and severe mental illness as West Virginia.
Right. That would be the logical conclusion. But sociologically, that is entirely false.
The data doesn't back it up.
Not even a little. Rates of serious mental illness and illicit drug use are broadly similar across state lines everywhere.
Really? Broadly similar everywhere.
Yeah. In fact, when you look at the opioid epidemic specifically, states like West Virginia, Arkansas, and Kentucky carry the absolute heaviest burdens of opioid addiction in the entire nation.
They are ground zero.
They are. They also contend with some of the highest rates of deep structural poverty.
Okay, let's make sure we really underline this because it breaks people's brains when they hear it.
It's very counterintuitive.
West Virginia is ground zero for the opioid crisis, and they have massive widespread poverty. Yet, they maintain some of the absolute lowest per capita homelessness rates in the United States.
Correct.
Meanwhile, California has broadly similar baseline rates of mental illness, but 5 times the homelessness. So Colburn and Aldern, they methodically tested every single variable the public usually blames, right?
They did. They ran the regressions on all the usual suspects.
Okay, what did they find?
Well, they tested mental illness prevalence. It didn't correlate with high homelessness.
Okay.
They tested drug use rates. No correlation. They tested poverty rates and found that the poorest states often have the lowest rates of homelessness.
Which is wild.
And they even tested the persistent myth of homeless migration.
Oh, the idea that people move to California for the warm weather or the generous welfare benefits.
Exactly. I mean, I hear that weather argument all the time.
They just want to camp on the beach.
Exactly, that old stereotype. But the migration data definitively disproves it.
It does.
Yeah. The overwhelming majority of people experiencing homelessness live in the exact same region where they held their last permanent address.
So they aren't migrating. They're falling into homelessness in their own hometowns.
Exactly. Weather and welfare generosity have zero statistical correlation to regional homelessness rates.
So when they stripped away all the noise, what was the singular missing variable that actually explained the map?
The price and availability of housing.
Rent.
Rent, vacancy rates, the housing market. It is entirely dictated by the housing market.
Okay, this is where we reconcile the 2 levels of analysis from the very beginning of the deep dive. Rent determines the scale. The total numbers.
Yes.
Let me test an analogy here to see if I'm fully grasping the mechanism Colburn and Aldern are describing.
Okay, go for it.
It sounds like a brutal game of musical chairs.
Oh, that's exactly what it is.
Right. So let's say a local housing market has 10 people in it. But because of zoning laws, construction deficits, and heavy NIMBYism, there are only 8 chairs.
8 affordable apartments.
Right. 8 affordable apartments. When the music stops, 2 people are mathematically guaranteed to be left standing.
Unavoidable.
That lack of chairs is the housing shortage. That dictates the scale. 2 people will be homeless no matter what happens, no matter who they are.
That is the exact economic reality. The housing shortage guarantees the outcome of 2 homeless people.
So then the question becomes, who are the 2 people left standing?
Right.
And this is where the 2 levels connect. If rent dictates how many people fall, illness and addiction determine who falls.
Precisely. Because the game of musical chairs is hyper-competitive.
Landlords have their pick.
Right. In an environment with a massive deficit of affordable units, landlords can be incredibly selective.
They want the best tenant possible.
Of course. So who is the first to lose their footing? It is the person with a biological or psychological vulnerability.
The person with untreated schizophrenia who has a gap in their employment history.
Exactly. Or the individual with a severe substance use disorder who has a prior eviction on their record or a poor credit score.
Or even just a physical disability, relying on a fixed, like, $900 a month disability check.
Yes. They are systemically outcompeted for the few available units by people with dual incomes, pristine credit, and first and last month's rent ready to hand over in cash.
Which explains the West Virginia paradox perfectly.
Walk me through it.
Well, in West Virginia, the housing market might look like 10 people and 10 chairs.
Right. Enough supply.
Even if 2 of those people are struggling with severe opioid addiction or living in deep poverty, there is still a chair for them.
Because the rent is $400 a month.
Exactly. They might be profoundly sick, but they have a roof over their heads. They are housed.
Their illness dictates their personal struggle, but the abundant housing market prevents them from becoming a homelessness statistic.
But in an expensive market, like Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Seattle, you might have 10 people and only 5 chairs.
A massive shortage.
So you have exponentially more homeless people.
Yeah.
And that population is drawn from a much wider, economically vulnerable slice of the public.
And this reconciliation, it stops the two sides of the political debate from just endlessly talking past each other.
Because both are kind of right.
Yes. Yes, the individuals you see suffering on the street are profoundly sick. That is a fact.
Right.
But the reason there are so many more of them on the streets of California than West Virginia is purely a function of the rent.
Okay, but tracing this back to the individual level.
Yeah.
If we know that the housing market creates the conditions for a fall, why is the person with a biological vulnerability, like severe bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, allowed to hit the pavement at all?
It's a great question.
I mean, we live in a highly developed modern society. We have Social Security, we have Medicare, we have housing authorities.
On paper, we have a system.
Right. But it feels like our safety net is an obstacle course designed by someone who fundamentally doesn't understand the nature of psychiatric disability. Where is the system catching them?
Well, to understand the total collapse of the psychiatric safety net, we have to look back at the history of deinstitutionalization.
Right. The closing of the asylums.
Exactly. This was a massive systemic shift in how the United States treats severe mental illness beginning in the mid-20th century.
What does the data look like for that?
The data point that illustrates this failure is incredibly stark.
Right.
In 1970, the United States maintained roughly 237 inpatient psychiatric beds per 100,000 people.
237.
Yes. By 2020, that capacity had plummeted to roughly 37 beds per 100,000 people.
From 237 down to 37? That is an absolute free fall.
It's a complete dismantling of the infrastructure.
And I know the state psychiatric asylums of the mid-century were often horrific, abusive places.
Oh, absolutely.
There were investigative journalists exposing straitjackets, lobotomies, and profound neglect.
Think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Exactly. So the righteous, well-intentioned movement was to shut them down.
Which was the morally correct impulse.
But where were these hundreds of thousands of highly vulnerable patients supposed to go?
Well, they were discharged based on a promise, specifically codified in legislation like the 1963 Community Mental Health Act.
What was the promise?
The promise was community-based care.
Okay.
The vision was that individuals with serious mental illness would no longer be warehoused in rural asylums. Instead, they would live integrated into society, supported by local outpatient clinics, newly developed antipsychotic medications, and heavily subsidized housing.
I mean, in theory, that is a beautifully humane model.
In theory, it is the gold standard of care.
Right.
But in practice, it was one of the greatest systemic betrayals in modern American history.
Because we didn't fund it.
Exactly. The community-based care system was never, ever funded at the scale required to actually replace the state hospitals.
So what happened?
As political priorities shifted in the 1980s, block grants were slashed, federal funding dried up, and the financial burden was shoved onto local municipalities that simply couldn't afford it.
Passing the buck.
Yes. The asylums were closed, the state budgets were saved, and the alternative infrastructure was essentially abandoned mid-construction.
So you have a highly vulnerable population discharged into a world without reliable access to the exact resources they need to survive.
No medication management, no supportive housing, no consistent psychiatric follow-up.
We basically traded the state hospital for the county jail and the city sidewalk.
That is precisely the trade we made. And it's why today the largest mental health facilities in the country are county jails.
That's horrifying. Places like Rikers Island.
Rikers Island, Cook County Jail in Chicago, and the Los Angeles County Twin Towers facility. Those are our de facto mental hospitals now.
Wow. So if we look at the safety net that does exist today, the disability benefits, the Section 8 housing vouchers, the community clinics.
Right.
How does that system mechanically fail the individual? Walk me through the actual journey of someone with untreated, serious mental illness trying to navigate this net.
Okay, well, the current safety net requires an extraordinary amount of executive function, patience, and bureaucratic savvy.
All things that mental illness attacks.
Exactly. It requires the exact cognitive tools that serious mental illness erodes.
Right.
So let's trace the timeline of an individual living with schizophrenia in a cheap apartment. They are supported by their family and a monthly supplemental security income check, or SSI.
Okay, they're housed. They're stable.
For now. Then they start experiencing a paranoid episode, perhaps believing the clinic doctors are monitoring them or trying to poison them.
Right, common delusion.
Because of the paranoia, they miss their appointment at the clinic.
And because they miss the appointment, their prescription lapses.
Yes. And without the antipsychotic medication, the symptoms rapidly compound. The paranoia deepens into full, uncontrolled psychosis.
Okay.
During this time, they receive a piece of mail from the Social Security Administration. It's just a routine annual recertification to prove they are still disabled.
Just standard paperwork.
Right. But the individual is too disorganized or too suspicious of the government to open the envelope.
They think it's a trap.
Exactly. So the deadline passes, the SSI benefits are automatically suspended by the system. Now, they have no income to pay the rent.
And if they have family, the family probably tries to intervene.
Right. They do. But the individual, deep in their psychosis, might become hostile. They might accuse the family of plotting against them, and they burn that final bridge of support.
And the family's exhausted, probably out of financial resources themselves, and they hit a legal wall because they can't force their adult child into treatment.
Right. And suddenly, the eviction notice is taped to the door.
Just like that.
Just like that. Navigating these highly bureaucratic, inflexible systems is nearly impossible when you are symptomatic. The path from being housed and relatively stable to sleeping on a piece of cardboard can literally take just a single chaotic month.
What's tragic is that the mental illness didn't create the housing shortage, and it didn't slash the funding for the clinics.
No.
But it acts as a homing beacon for the holes in our social fabric.
That's exactly what it does.
If there is a gap in the bureaucracy, untreated mental illness will find it and fall straight through it.
It perfectly targets the weak points of our systemic neglect.
Which brings us to the darkest evolution of this crisis.
The street mortality.
Yeah. Historically, slipping through those bureaucratic holes meant enduring a very hard, very traumatic life on the streets.
Right.
But today, because of a specific chemical accelerant that has just saturated the environment, slipping through those holes increasingly means immediate death.
We have to analyze the impact of the fentanyl era. There's no way around it.
I was looking at the recent mortality data you provided.
Yeah.
If you examine reports like Multnomah County's Domicile Unknown report in Oregon, which meticulously tracks the deaths of unhoused individuals.
A very grim but necessary report.
Very grim. Or the recent CDC and Health Affairs research linking rising homelessness directly to fatal drug poisonings. It paints a terrifying picture of the last decade, roughly from 2013 to 2023.
Fentanyl has fundamentally altered the physical calculus of street survival.
It has weaponized the environment. The overdose crisis is just an unavoidable gravity in any honest discussion of homelessness today.
It really is. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is up to 50 times stronger than heroin.
50 times?
Yeah. It is cheap to produce, easy to traffic, and it has made the street lethal in a way that simply did not exist a generation ago.
We established earlier that the trauma of the street drives self-medication, right? The need to numb the cold and the pain. But why is the unsheltered population so uniquely, disproportionately vulnerable to this specific drug? I mean, obviously, the sheer potency is a factor for anyone, housed or unhoused.
Of course.
But why is the mortality rate so astronomically higher for the person living in the tent?
It comes down to the mechanics of environmental exposure and profound isolation.
Okay, unpack that for me.
When you are unsheltered, you exist under a heavy cloud of social stigma and aggressive policing.
You're constantly being watched or moved along.
Right. There is a constant ambient fear of arrest or of having your tent and all your worldly possessions confiscated in a municipal sweep.
Right.
Because of this hostile architecture, unsheltered individuals often retreat to highly isolated, hidden areas to consume drugs.
To avoid detection.
Exactly. They are using alone, zipped up inside a tent, or tucked behind a dumpster in a dark alleyway.
And the cardinal rule of surviving an opioid overdose is that you cannot reverse it yourself.
Impossible. The drug depresses your central nervous system until you simply stop breathing. You just go to sleep and you don't wake up.
So if you're using alone in a zip tent and you consume a lethal microdose of fentanyl,
there is no one present to recognize the signs of overdose.
no one to hear you stop breathing.
Exactly. There is no one to administer naloxone, the nasal spray that reverses opioid toxicity, and there is no one to dial 911.
The isolation is what actually kills them.
Yes. Furthermore, even if an outreach worker or paramedic finds them in time and revives them, unsheltered individuals lack a warm, safe, stable environment to physically recover in.
Right, they go right back to the concrete.
And the physiological toll of chronic exposure lowers their overall baseline resilience. Their bodies just can't take it.
It's the ultimate tragic convergence of all the mechanisms we've discussed
It
today.
really is.
The trauma and sleep deprivation of the street drive the psychological need for opioids just to endure the night.
Yes.
The stigma and criminalization force them to use those opioids in total isolation. And the drug supply itself has become exponentially more lethal. The street drives you to the drug to survive, and the drug kills you because you're on the street.
It is a devastating closed-loop cycle.
It's brutal.
However, in the interest of being rigorous with the data, we must highlight a crucial, highly recent data point that offers a glimmer of hope.
I saw this in the dossier, the provisional data from the CDC, right?
Yes. For the 12-month period ending in September 2024, provisional CDC data shows that national overdose deaths saw a sharp, unexpected decline of roughly 24%.
A 24% drop.
Yes. This is the first sustained, significant drop we have seen in years.
I mean, a 24% drop is monumental. That represents tens of thousands of lives saved.
It absolutely does.
It suggests that a combination of widespread naloxone distribution, public health interventions, and perhaps shifts in the illicit drug market supply itself are actually working.
Yes, things are moving in the right direction.
We have to acknowledge that as a real, tangible turning point.
It is absolute cause for cautious optimism. But we must remain hyper-vigilant about how we interpret it in this specific context.
Right, because of the street population.
Exactly.
Right.
While the national average is dropping, the baseline rate of mortality for someone sleeping outside remains unacceptably disproportionately high.
They're still at the most risk.
The unsheltered population remains the most dangerously exposed demographic to any fluctuation in drug toxicity.
So we have untangled this massive web of causes and consequences.
A lot of threads.
We know the mechanics of how rent dictates the total scale of the problem. We understand how the chronic sleep deprivation and violence of the street create psychological decay and drive the self-medication cycle.
Right.
We've seen how the historical collapse of the psychiatric safety net guarantees the most vulnerable fall first, and how the isolation of the street makes fentanyl deadly.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Which brings us to the ultimate friction point. If the causes and consequences are this deeply entangled, how do cities actually fix it?
The million-dollar question. We are arriving at the central policy paradox of chronic homelessness.
This debate dominates city council meetings, mayoral races, and all those Johns Hopkins reports.
It really does. And the fundamental mechanical question is this. Which comes first, the house or the hospital?
This is the ideological battle between treatment first and housing first.
Exactly.
Let's map out the underlying logic of both approaches, starting with treatment first.
The treatment first model, which is sometimes called linear or staircase housing, is built on the foundational assumption that illness and addiction are the primary root causes of an individual's homelessness.
Okay.
The logic dictates that an individual must achieve a baseline of sobriety and psychiatric compliance before they can be trusted to successfully maintain a tenancy.
The theory being that if you take someone who is actively smoking methamphetamine and experiencing severe untreated psychosis, and you just hand them the keys to a subsidized apartment, they will inevitably fail.
Right.
They might damage the physical unit, disrupt the neighbors, forget to pay their portion of the rent, and eventually be evicted right back onto the street.
That's the fear, yes.
Therefore, the policy mandates that we fund mandatory rehab beds and transitional psychiatric stabilization facilities first. You graduate from the shelter to the rehab to the apartment.
It is a highly intuitive sequential model.
It makes sense on paper.
It does. But it encounters massive friction when it collides with the data we explored earlier regarding the street as a trauma machine.
Right. The sleep deprivation data.
Yes. This is where the housing first counter-argument originates.
Right. Because housing first looks at the Adams Review. It looks at the physiological realities of sleep deprivation.
Exactly.
If the street is the thing actively causing the psychosis and driving the biological need to self-medicate, then demanding that someone get sober and mentally stable while they're still living inside that trauma machine is functionally impossible.
It's setting them up to fail.
It's like demanding our deep-sea diver heal their broken bones while they are still being crushed by 300 feet of water pressure.
That is the exact core tenet of housing first. It views a locked door, a safe bed, and a private shower not as a reward for clinical stability, but as the fundamental medical prerequisite for it.
You have to get them out of the water pressure first.
Exactly. The policy dictates that you provide permanent, unconditional housing first to immediately stop the compounding environmental trauma.
And then what?
Once the person is safe, well-rested, and no longer in survival mode, you wrap intensive voluntary supportive services around them. Psychiatrists, addiction counselors, job training, right inside that housing.
Provide the foundation, then build the house.
That's the idea.
But this ideological clash has recently evolved into a highly politically charged debate over coercion, hasn't it?
It has become fiercely debated, yes.
And I want to reiterate to our listener here, we are maintaining absolute neutrality on this. We are not endorsing a specific policy. We are analyzing the mechanics of a very real, legal, and ethical debate happening in our courts right now.
Right. Just looking at the arguments.
As the visible crisis has worsened, and as fentanyl has increased the mortality rate, we are seeing a significant legislative push toward involuntary treatment and conservatorships.
Yes. Policymakers are aggressively debating the expansion of laws that allow the state to involuntarily commit or appoint a conservator for individuals deemed gravely disabled by severe mental illness or substance use disorder.
What are the objective clinical arguments driving the pro-coercion side?
Proponents of mandated care point to a specific neurological condition called anosognosia.
Anosognosia, what is that?
It frequently accompanies severe schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Anosognosia is a neurological inability for the patient to recognize that they are sick.
Their brain blocks it.
Their brain literally cannot process their own illness. It's not denial, it's a structural deficit. So proponents argue that waiting for someone with anosognosia to voluntarily walk into a clinic and ask for help is essentially a death sentence, particularly when they are exposed to the elements in fentanyl.
Because they will never ask for help if they don't think they're sick.
Right. They argue that involuntary treatment is a necessary, deeply compassionate medical intervention to save the lives of people who are too sick to protect themselves.
They argue that leaving them to their autonomy is actually just abandoning them to their illness.
Exactly.
Okay, so what is the counter-argument from civil rights advocates and the critics of this approach?
The critics argue that involuntary commitment is a profound, traumatic violation of civil liberties that rarely results in durable, long-term healing.
Okay.
They argue the mechanics of the current system are fundamentally broken.
How so?
Well, forcibly hospitalizing someone on a 72-hour psychiatric hold, stabilizing them temporarily with medication, and then releasing them back onto the exact same street corner because there is no long-term housing available is an exercise in futility.
You're just spinning the resolving door.
Exactly. Furthermore, they argue that the political enthusiasm for conservatorships is often just a performative attempt to sweep visible suffering out of the public square.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right, without actually dedicating the billions of dollars required to build the long-term care facilities and permanent housing those individuals truly require.
It is a staggering ethical knot.
It's incredibly complex.
But listening to this debate over how to legally mandate treatment for people who refuse it, it brings me right back to the measurement problem we started this entire hour with.
How so?
The point-in-time count fails because people don't trust the stranger with the clipboard.
Right.
How do you design an effective, durable public health policy for a population in acute life-or-death crisis that is fundamentally and often highly justifiably distrustful of the exact systems trying to survey, police, and treat them?
That is the real challenge. Rebuilding that trust is arguably the most difficult infrastructural challenge we face.
Because the system has broken that trust over and over.
Exactly. If the system has repeatedly failed you, if you were discharged from a hospital without a care plan, evicted over a missed piece of mail, criminalized for sleeping outside, and traumatized by the environment, why would you trust a social worker, a police officer, or a judge?
You would.
Healing requires trust, and trust requires safety.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, peeling back the layers of a crisis that is so often reduced to a simple soundbite. Let's synthesize this whole journey for the listener.
Okay, if there is one paramount, vital takeaway from all of this data, from Colburn and Aldern to the clinical assessments to the mortality reports, it is this. We must never conflate a visible correlation with the underlying cause.
Right, yes. Untreated psychiatric illness and severe addiction are highly visible, and they are disproportionately prevalent among the chronically unsheltered population. That is an undeniable fact.
Absolutely undeniable.
But the evidence unequivocally shows that the brutal physiological trauma of surviving the street frequently causes the addiction and radically exacerbates the mental illness.
And while that biological vulnerability dictates who loses their footing in a brutal game of musical chairs, it is the rent of the city, the absolute lack of available housing, that determines the scale of the crisis.
So a durable solution, a real systemic fix, cannot be one-dimensional. It cannot just be municipal sweeps, and it cannot just be unfunded mandates.
No, it requires an acknowledgement of both simultaneous realities. It requires a massive expansion of housing to stop the trauma of the street from compounding, and it requires a dedicated, well-funded, accessible hand to heal the illness.
A roof and a hand.
A roof and a hand, working in tandem.
We started this deep dive with an image. You walking down the sidewalk, seeing someone nodding off in a doorway, and instinctively making a judgment about how they got there.
We all do it.
I hope that after spending this hour looking at the actual mechanics of the crisis, the next time you see that image, the straight line in your mind isn't so straight anymore.
The picture is a lot more complicated.
It is. I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over on your own. If the street acts as a highly efficient factory that actively manufactures psychological trauma and severe addiction, how much of the billions of dollars we spend every single year on emergency room healthcare, ambulance rides, police interventions, and crisis management is essentially just paying an astronomical premium to treat the side effects of our broken housing market?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question we all need to be asking right now.
It really is. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.